Hello and welcome to Africa World News, reporting on issues from Africa and projecting Africa to the world with your community journalist, Inshira Kwabi Angela. And on today's segment, Influencing Africa, we have bringing to you a very amazing personality, a pride of Africa, an honor to womanhood, and esteemed of all, she is the only female candidate for Kenya's upcoming elections. It is an honor to bring to you Her Excellency Wairimu Faith. We are glad to have you.
Thank you very much, Angela. It's a pleasure to be on your show and for us to have this conversation. My name, as you have rightly said, is Her Excellency Wairimu Faith, and I am a presidential candidate for the upcoming August 9 general election in Kenya. Having said that, I'd just like to tell you just a bit about myself. I went to the University of Nairobi and I begin to work. I work in the country, go to the US work, and then come back. And I have a very vibrant career with the US Embassy in Nairobi, where I have a very unique task to oversee education for the US Embassy, and that is State Department in Nairobi. And I do this from 2012 all through 2020. And then in 2020, I would leave and then get another bigger position within State Department, where I oversee the region of East and Central Africa. And I oversee all the embassies and the consulates in that region to help with the mobility of students. So short of it, that's who I am, that's where I'm coming from, and that's who Wairimu Faith is. Where I'm coming from, I am faced by a question: what is elections? What does elections mean? And from history, and history helps us to make better decisions for the future, it tells me that we need to rethink about election process, and we need to ask ourselves a very genuine question as Africans. What do elections mean to us? What is an election? And what role are we playing in the election? Because it determines how our lives pan out. In family, I grew up in a wonderful family of 5 children, and one of my brothers had a heart disease. And because of the heart disease, what happened is that in the 80s, we were paying like $1,000 for his medication, and $1,000 in the 1980s in Kenya, that's a lot of money. And what happens is that by the time we are in the 90s, our family resources have been wiped out because of his heart condition. He lived with that condition for 25 years until we were able to take him to hospital for an open heart surgery. And this, again, shapes how I think. And this is what I believe, that no family has to go broke, has to live in abject poverty just because one person is unwell. And also thinking about it, it also shapes how I think about our healthcare in Africa. Do we have a system that offers care for people that are sick? Having said that, I will also want to say that where I'm coming from, in my family, we have people who are desiring a better leadership, and we have leadership conversations. When we were having the 2010 Constitution review, I remember we sat as a family and discussed what the Constitution was. And so what we did is that for the one who is a lawyer, look at this Constitution, analyze it as a lawyer. For me who's in education, analyze it. And as a linguist, what are the grammatical errors that would create ambiguity within our Constitution and affect its interpretation? For the bankers, again, they will do that. And so my family is very involved in politics and in leadership. And I believe that now this is the time for us to take it to another level, for us to shape the politics of Kenya, and by extension, the politics of Africa. One of the most critical things for me is that I am always bewildered by the amounts of money that government spends on things that are not important. A lot of redundancies in Africa. And again, looking at my country, the things that we don't need to be spending on, but we're spending on them. But at the same time, what we do is that we ignore what is the real infrastructure for development, because we cannot think about infrastructure and say, hey, roads are the biggest infrastructure. Yet we forget the people who are going to grow the economy. So I am interested in people, and all through my life, what I have done is that I have invested in people. Because when you invest in people, guess what? You grow your country. You cannot invest money to protect a nation. You cannot invest money to protect buildings, but the civilians are dying. it leaves me wondering what your priorities are, because if you do not protect the civilian who is responsible for growing your economy, who is responsible for making sure that your nation is viable, not just economically, but also socially, but you're investing in other things, then we've got our priorities upside down. My interest is in people, and when I look at my policies and what I want to do as the president of the nation of Kenya is to invest in people. Once you invest in people, guess what? You've got everything right. Looking at that philosophy that I have towards life, and this also informs me something, that peace is very important, because if you do not have peace, you cannot build. Anytime you are in conflict, so many things get damaged, and you go back so many years trying to rebuild what you wasted during violence. But most importantly is that when you lose life, you cannot get it back. I'm not saying that miracles don't happen, miracles do happen. But what is important is for us to safeguard the life of every Kenyan, the life of every African, because life is very important. You ask a very important question, Angela, and allow me to say this. There comes a time in everyone's life where you have to make a decision as to the trajectory of your life. You also have to make a decision as to what you're going to tolerate and what you're going to change, because whatever you tolerate, you cannot change it. Whatever you allow to slide by is going to destroy your life. And I am here and I'm looking at my forefathers who fought the Mau Mau War, and they fought the British colonial masters. When I look at them, they did not have any sophisticated artillery, but they looked at a generation that was not born. I didn't get to meet them, but I've had stories of the sacrifices they made for me. And they decided that I was not going to be a slave to anyone. And that's why you're interviewing me here. If they did not fight that war, I can tell you the British were not going to live without any form of resistance. It is their resistance that caused the British colonial masters to live. If they would make that sacrifice, then I have a responsibility as a Kenyan and as an African to resist poor leadership. Because I have a responsibility, just as I am free, to make sure that my descendants and children that are not yet born, who are going to live in my country, are going to be free. Today, our neo-colonialism really is not what we saw in the partition and scramble for Africa. Our colonization today is in debt. We are so in debt as a continent. And my country, speaking specifically about Kenya, Kenya is in debt. And if we do not address the corruption issue, then we continue to borrow money that our politicians are going to steal, loot. We're talking about grand corruption, and put that money in their pocket. But who's going to pay this money? It is every citizen. Right now, as I am speaking to you, every Kenyan owes 137,000 Kenyan shillings. That's $1,300 as it is right now. We've hit our borrowing ceiling a couple of times. But Kenya is a beautiful country. We have a lot of potential. And instead of going the debt way, it is time for us to have this conversation and say, are we going to tolerate an economy that is being built on borrowing funds? Or are we going to change how our economy runs and make sure that we have a viable economy that we are proud of bequeathing the next generation? Thank you very much. Life is about fulfilling purpose. Any life that is not geared towards pursuing purpose is totally off course. And so the purpose is to make sure that Kenya is successful. And what we are looking at our manifesto. My top 3 priorities: education, the economy, and agriculture. Once my administration fixes those things, invests in those 3 areas, and there are many other areas that we're going to work on, for instance, health, we are going to ensure that our country gives Kenyans a meaningful life. There is nothing that bothers me as a young, educated person who wakes up in the morning and they absolutely aren't going anywhere. And they're going to wake up tomorrow and not go anywhere because they do not have anything meaningful that they are doing to make sure that they're economically independent. And so when we look at about education, what is our education system like? Are we matching the needs of the current job market? And I will answer this and say, definitely we are not meeting it. And COVID has changed the world. How is our education system responding to a post-COVID world? That's one of the things that my administration is going to be dealing with. The second thing is the economy. I am very purposeful on working and reshaping our economy, the monetary policy, the taxation policy. and how we are going to build revenue for the country without overtaxing people. The third thing is agriculture. Agriculture is the backbone of the Kenyan economy. It's time for me to invest in it, because for the longest time we talk about it and we tell farmers they're very important, but no one really puts money where their mouth is. Three things I want to give very quick examples on. The first thing, the farmer. We used to have people that we call, and these are professionals, agricultural extension officers. These were like relationship managers that we have in the bank today. And secondly, that they had the professional support that they required. That's the first thing we're going to do, bring back the agricultural extension officers to support our farmers. And because the farming industry has a huge gap in terms of information and data, they will collect the data and give us information. Right now, we are having a fertilizer shortage in our country. It's not supposed to be like that. All the time, the farmers are crying about fertilizer shortage. And I think for me, this is a very commonsensical issue. Once we have the data and we know how much we require, how many tons we require per year, we can create storage facilities and store these fertilizer for our farmers and also give it to them at reasonable prices. So our prices are not supposed to be influenced because there's a conflict in the world. We are supposed to pre-plan. Secondly, we have communities that are herdsmen. And most of the places where we have herdsmen, there's a crisis. What is the crisis? The crisis is premised upon natural resources, water. Again, very commonsensical issues to resolve. Drill boreholes, make sure that there is water. Build artificial dams and make sure that we have water. And again, bring back the veterinary officers to make sure that this group of pastoralists have the support that they need. And finally, we cannot talk about agriculture and not talk about the environment, because they have a correlation. And we're going to, again, invest a lot of money in forestry and make sure that we have a very controlled weather. And if we cannot really control it naturally, we're going to control it artificially, because our farming really shouldn't depend on the rain. We can irrigate, we can do so many other things. Thank you very much, Angela. And I think this is a very important conversation that we must have in Africa. I'm writing a book about the role of women in leadership. And unfortunately, we do not have as many women leaders like we would like to have. I was attending a conference that had women presidents in Kenya, and there are very few. Very few of them vied to become president. And most of them have been president just because the person who was in power died and then they became president. But I would like us to look at somebody like Her Excellency Salif Johnson, incredible leader who has done an amazing work. And these are the people, when we look at, we realize that we cannot sit back and pass the buck to the men and say, hey, this is your work, you need to lead us. It is time for us to stand up and begin to be leaders. It doesn't have to be in government. It also has to be in the private sector. Let women arise and let women be leaders in the private sector. In the church, when I travel to most African countries, sometimes it bothers me that women sit down throughout the church service. You don't see them doing anything. Make sure that you are contributing to what is happening in that space. Now, let us come to a very important question that you have asked about investing in ourselves. As women, we must invest in ourselves. And sometimes it is not a cheap process. It is not easy to do that because we have other things that we are doing. And when I talk about the affordability of it, I'm not talking about money, because sometimes money is not the problem. But as a woman, the things that we have to manage, time is a resource that we do not have. And this is what I'm going to say. We take care of everyone. We take care of everything. Is it possible that you save 1 hour every day to invest in yourself? Because you, woman, are the best investment that you will ever invest in. Because when you invest in yourself, you are going to benefit a whole community. And think about it. COVID has exposed us to the internet. When you go to the internet, you're going to find great resources, and they're there to benefit you. So women, it's time for us to arise. It's time for us to take our leadership positions, and it is time for us to contribute. Let me give you an example. Kenya has been free, or has been a republic from 1963. This year is 58 years post-independence. We have never had a female presidential candidate, and I believe I am winning this election. I will be the first woman president of the Republic of Kenya. 50 years, it's taken 58 years. That's over half a century for us to look at a woman and say, guess what? There are people who carry competence, and they're people who can lead us. We lead households, we take care of everything else, we lead corporations, and we do an amazing job across the world. But it is time for us to get into this political space and any other space that God has given you a space to influence and lead. Thank you very much. Pre-colonization, Africa was one family, really. And if you study most African ethnic communities, you will realize that where they are right now, they migrated from somewhere else to be where they are. So talking about my ethnic community, we migrated from the Democratic Republic of Congo. That's where we come from, and then we finally settled in Kenya. So when you look at Africans, you're basically looking at one family. When you look at Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda, we have Kenyan Maasais and we have Tanzanian Maasais. And sometimes I think it's very laughable that we just have these petitions that separated families and called others Kenyans, others Tanzanians, and other Ugandans. We've come to a place of growth and realization that what the Pan-African movement and what our forefathers, His Excellency Kwame Nkrumah, had seen is what we need to build on. That we are one people and we are better united than divided. We are seeing unions across the world being formed. And within Africa, we have ECOWAS, we have SADC, we have the East African Community. It is time for us to come together, pool our resources, and work as a people. But this is what I have to say to every African who's going to watch this. You cannot be a bystander. You cannot be somebody who just watches the election and does nothing about it. You cannot throw your hands in the air and say, what's going to change? You are a very important person. Your voice matters, your vote matters, and it is time for you to begin to hold your political leaders accountable. Do not vote in people that you cannot hold accountable. Do not vote people who buy your votes, because they're going to buy your vote pre-election, and then they will disappear for 5 years, squander government money, squander public funds, and after they have squandered it, after 5 years or 4 years, your life can only be worse. We have seen the worst that Africa can see. And I believe that this is a new dawn for Africa. It is not up to our politicians. It's up to you, it's up to me to make sure that Africa rises as the powerhouse that it was meant to be. Thank you very much.